Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yamin of Revolution. We got a World War III update, the fall of the empire. Before we get into that, y'all be sure to wipe y'all feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Let's get right into the content tonight. Salute.
License an absolute waiver to Iran, allowing Iran to sell its oil and petrochemicals and other natural resources to the rest of the world using U.S. dollars. Now, Donald Trump talked a very tough game yesterday. He threatened that he was going to kill all of the Iranian negotiators. This morning, we see massive concessions coming from Donald Trump, and then he quickly turned his attention to the reflecting pool, and now they are draining the reflecting pool once again in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump is blaming the algae infestation on vandals and Antifa. You can't make this stuff up. And from what we're hearing, and everybody in D.C. is saying, while they are draining this reflecting pool, people are saying they've never smelt such a noxious and disgusting smell before, between the algae, the hydrogen peroxide, and all of the lining. It's mixed to form this putrid odor that's making people want to vomit next to it. I just sincerely hope that that's the least of the problems, because, you know, this seems like there could be major issues with all of the chemicals that were put in there. The same way I've been flagging all of the asbestos that likely exists when Donald Trump tore down the East Wing. I think we'll hear about this in years, maybe longer, about all the carcinogens in the air right outside the White House when they just tore it down like that. We're focused on that here at the Midas Touch Network, of course. So here's what happened first thing this morning. The Trump administration issued a 60-day general waiver suspending U.S. sanctions on Iranian crude oil, petroleum, petrochemical products, and more, allowing Iran to sell its oil on the global market, including to the United States, through August 21st, 2026. The Treasury Department's OFAC general license authorizes related banking, insurance, shipping, and other transactions necessary to facilitate those sales, while excluding transactions involving Cuba, North Korea, and Russian-occupied regions in Ukraine. It is notable that based on my reading of the law, you require congressional approval to do this, because it also involves Iran's nuclear program. But Donald Trump doesn't ever respect the law, and MAGA Mike Johnson has turned our House of Representatives and Congress into the Russian Duma. So that's what's going on there. As Javier Blas, he's been really good covering this. He writes, crucially, the general license not only allows importers of Iranian oil to pay Tehran, including via previously sanctioned entities, but also to do so in U.S. dollars. For 60 days at least, Washington is allowing Tehran back into the dollar club to repatriate its petrodollars, and this rolls back 40 years plus of American oil sanctions to Iran. This will likely turn Iran into one of the wealthiest nations in the world, and I think we will start to see, and we are seeing already this morning, Iran take advantage of that. They've been prepared. They've had a plan, and we have seen lots of tankers, lots of those VLCCs leaving through the Strait of Hormuz now. But what we're really seeing, the majority of them, Iranian tankers, VLCCs, Chinese-linked tankers, and even Iran's top energy executive who was in Switzerland for these negotiations said as of yesterday, Iran had been able to transfer and get out of the Strait of Hormuz over 25 million barrels. We believe that number is going to become closer to 40 million barrels. Now, Iran's foreign minister, Araghchi, actually hailed the Switzerland talks as making major progress, although he makes very clear with respect to the reciprocal obligations owed to the United States, any of the benefits flowing to the United States, that comes later. Specifically, once Israel leaves Lebanon and once there is a true ceasefire in Lebanon. So the way Iran structured this deal, starting with Article 1, is that the U.S. has to go commitment for commitment, and the U.S. needs to pass a series of tests, and then Iran will unlock later the benefits that flow to the U.S., which basically it's what's in the JCPOA originally under the Obama deal to let the IAE inspectors in for Iran to continue to enrich uranium, but downblend so it's not weapons grade. Again, everything in the JCPOA. And then, of course, we went to this catastrophic and unlawful war in the first place, which we shouldn't have done. And also, I think Iran realizes, look, let's get our benefits right now, which basically negates the whole purpose of the U.S. blockade. Let Iran make all of this money. And Iran figures Israel's never going to leave Lebanon. Donald Trump is incapable of keeping his word or following through with the deal. So let's extract our benefits immediately. Let's continue to do that. And then inevitably, Israel's going to breach and Trump will breach, but we will have gotten our benefits. I think that's the calculus. And I think, look, hope springs eternal. I think everybody hopes for peace, me included. But here's what Israel said this morning. Netanyahu posted a video message saying, the directive from me and the Minister of Defense in Israel is named Israel Katz, to the IDF is clear. We have not changed. Our forces in southern Lebanon have full freedom of action to thwart any direct or emerging threat against them or residents of the north. The IDF faces no restrictions in this guard. I stand behind them. The entire nation stands behind them. I remain firm in my position that we will stay in the so-called security zone. That's what they call it in Israel, in southern Lebanon for as long as necessary to protect the residents of the north and all citizens of the state of Israel. So Israel's saying, Donald, we will not comply with any of your deconfliction initiatives. We are staying in Lebanon. Then his national security minister, Ben-Gvir, says, the cost of giving in to international pressure is a heavy one. My position is, instead of ceasefire, we should attack Beirut. And he also said that he believes that there should be thousands of Lebanese mothers mourning, and that would make him happy, apparently. Here is what J.D. Vance said at a press conference earlier this morning about Donald Trump continuing to threaten to kill the Iranian negotiators. J.D. Vance is like, yo, I'm a millennial. We'd call this trash talking. Iran does some trash talking to us. Of course, you got to expect Donnie's going to trash talk you back by threatening to kill you and close the Strait of Hormuz and commit genocide. That's what we do in the United States. We do jokes in war and peace. LOL, JK. That's what the millennials do. This is what like J.D. Vance really said. I mean, it's horrific. Let's play this clip.
Look, what we told the Iranians yesterday is when you guys engage in what us millennials might call trash talk, you can't expect the president of the United States not to respond and not to correct the record. So when they say things that aren't true, the president is going to respond to it. I'm going to respond to it. Americans are going to respond to it. When they make threats that aren't rooted in reality, they have to accept that the president of the United States is actually going to set the record straight. That's all that happened. So yes, there was a little bit of threatening, there was a little bit of whining, but at the end of the day, the talks continued and we made great progress.
Did you know that helping dolphins led to the first essential fatty acid discovery in over 90 years? It's called C15, and it's a total game changer for aging health.
Nuclear inspectors last night, LOL, JK. And could you believe it? They were sleeping at 2 a.m. So we weren't really able to get some technical details in there. Okay. Everybody find this to be funny jokes? Here, play this clip.
Also, in terms of when we could see this entire conflict end, do you think this can end by the midterm elections?
Well, look, right now the conflict is in a ceasefire, and certainly our hope is that we get to the final deal and a permanent settlement. But right now, I think we've made great progress, and we should all celebrate that. In terms of when the nuclear inspectors are going to start, it's funny, we were trying to call some of the inspectors last night around 2 a.m. As you can expect, not many people are answering their phone at 2 a.m. I expect that will happen at the minimum this week. But we think even some of those conversations with the inspectors and with the IAEA could happen as soon as today. But I haven't checked in with our team since we made that 2 a.m. phone call to some of those inspectors.
And then JD Vance says, but let's talk about what we've done, like building a house. We set the foundation. We haven't built the house, but we laid a successful foundation. I would say it may be like this, JD. It's kind of like building the Trump reflecting pool. You paint it blue, and then you say there's no algae. And then when there's problems, you blame the vandals. You blame Antifa. And JD, you may actually end up being the vandals and Antifa in this one. Here, let's play this clip.
We laid a very good foundation for a successful final deal. The final deal is the house. We set the foundation. We haven't built the house, but we've laid a successful foundation to get to a good place for the American people.
But JD Vance says at the end of the day, we know that a ceasefire doesn't really mean a ceasefire. It just means less fire. And that's what JD Vance has to say. Let's play this clip right here.
2, we also wanted to build a mechanism, a similar mechanism for deconfliction for the regional ceasefire. As the President of the United States has himself said, sometimes these ceasefires just mean you're shooting a little bit less, but we wanted to make sure that we had the proper coordination set up so that if there is shooting, if Hezbollah fires at Israel or if Israel responds, if there are other conflicts that arise in the region, we're actually talking to each other and figuring out how to stop the shooting, how to make the region safer, our allies and everybody else.
Now, going back to the reflecting pool for a moment, earlier today we saw significant law enforcement presence around the reflecting pool. The Trump regime is deputized
first quarrel that maybe Starmer had been indulging in some unsavory, inappropriate acts with these young men from Ukraine. I don't know if that's played any role in his desire to keep funneling weapons, but the drones that are being the drones that are hitting in Russia are creating a growing anger, and that's coming out of the UK. I think I candidly think we're only it won't be long before if this continues, that Russia will strike militarily in the UK at one of these drone factories and put them on notice and just say, well, we're not going to put up with this. They'll use an arresting. So that that's I think we face a greater risk of a war in Europe than we do in the Middle East with Iran in the next 2 to 3 months.
Yeah. Basically, there is no hope from what I've seen so far that someone would replace him with some sort of strategy different from the previous administrations. Do you see it? Nigel Farage, for example, which would be the alternative if they can?
Yeah, but they're going to have to have an election, aren't they?
Yeah, basically, yeah, because Nigel Farage today said we need that election happening in the United Kingdom. But I'm talking about a long run when it comes to Ukraine. Nothing of change would happen to the policy of the United Kingdom toward Russia and Ukraine. Is that
I think it would depend on if Najib Farage gets in. I don't see him necessarily as wanting to continue this confrontation with Russia. Look, the reality is the European countries. I always include the UK in this part of the European Union, even though they exited. They've got an energy crisis, just like the United States does on the near horizon. One of the ways up to this point that the UK and France and Italy have been able to avoid the not having low cost petrol and diesel is that the United States has been draining its own strategic petroleum reserve and shipping that overseas to Europe. But that's coming to an end here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, Donald Trump himself said last week that in 4 weeks there could be a massive crisis, and I think that's right. Just by the nature of there's been a concerted effort to mask the critical problems surrounding the lack of global oil supply. So the disruption that took place with the shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz, and then subsequent attacks on oil infrastructure in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates. It's taken a significant amount of, upwards of 20% or more of oil off the market, and it's not been replaced for 4 months. So there's a crisis looming, and then when that hits Europe, I think they're going to have other things on their mind than trying to continue to attack Russia. Does that make sense? You want to attack the one country that can supply you with cheap oil and gas? Really? That's your strategy? It's insane.
Larry, when it comes to the relationship between the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom and the King and the establishment in the United Kingdom, the City of London, those people who are running the sector, the most important sector, which is the economy within the society. How do you see the relationship? To my understanding, the prime ministers in the United Kingdom are not that powerful, even comparing to the king of the United Kingdom. That's why you see somehow, the upper hand in the hand of these people who are connected to the establishment. I would say the king is part of the establishment together with the City of London, running the whole show against Russia. That necessarily, in my opinion, means that they're gonna decide about the most important issue within Europe today, which is this sort of animosity toward Russia.
Well, why do you say that you think the prime minister's not that strong or not that influential?
Because he's basically is not elected by the people. They don't have this sort of the voting system, because they're basically talking about in other countries that there is no democracy, this and that. But after all, he has to be ratified by the king. He has too much influence coming from above. I'm talking about the king, the establishment, the economic sector.
Well, I would argue that actually the monarchy in London is increasingly irrelevant.
But they're connected to the establishment, Larry.
Well, yeah, they're connected to an establishment that's completely out of touch with the electorate. Now, it is.
Sorry for interrupting you. The reason I'm saying this, Larry, you remember 2 times the king had a meeting with Donald Trump. In both cases, he was pushing for the war in Ukraine. He was trying to do everything to convince the United States to stay in the fight in Ukraine.
Oh yeah, no, I don't deny that, but what Starmer and the, if you will, this elite class, I'd argue it still goes back to it's a couple of things. One, from the standpoint of King Charles, the death of the Tsar, the murder of the Tsar and his family, more than 100 years ago, that would have been his. Let's see, grandfather. Yeah, that would have been like his great uncle, just like his grandfather was the Queen Elizabeth's father. It was his cousin that was a Tsar, and so they basically have held the Bolsheviks, been quote angry at the Bolsheviks over that ever since. Except the current Russian government's not Bolshevik at all, just the opposite. So, but there is, the political pressure, the political expression of the people. It is indirect in the UK. You're right that Starmer's not directly elected, but they also, based upon the performance of these various politicians in their local elections, is always seen as a sign or a symbol. And it was when Labour in this last go round of local elections, they just got clobbered, that the cries increased for Starmer has to go. Now, but he held on. He still wielded significant power in terms of being able to commit England and to continue to provide the support. In fact, the UK right now that looks to be doing more from the standpoint of supplying weapons, drones, missiles than any other country in NATO, including the United States.
Yeah. Larry, negotiations. Finally, we have 2 delegations leaving Switzerland. And the outcome so far, it seems with the case of Lebanon, they have achieved some sort of management process for the case of Lebanon. First of all, to keep the ceasefire going on, and then the solution for the situation in Lebanon. What is your understanding? My feeling, it seems to me, as time goes by, the 2 sides are getting to the point that if the people in Israel want to get to the northern part of Israel, then Israel has to withdraw totally from the southern part of Lebanon. So some sort of exchange between the 2 sides. I don't know how capable the United States and Iran would be to achieve that. That would be a huge issue for both sides.
Well, look, who's driving the bus here? Okay, who is the ringmaster making these negotiations happen? It appears that title falls to Asman Munir, the Pakistani general, because he is in a position that is really playing the central role of bringing this together. Because you saw yesterday, after Donald Trump's intemperate remarks,
trash talk, as J.D. Vance said.
Well, this beyond trash talk. Where you're threatening to murder, you're threatening a war crime and assassination. Munir was able to somehow smooth things over with the Iranian delegation and get them back to the table. So they're still talking to the Americans. Now, that said, did you see the snub of J.D. Vance by the Qatari foreign minister? That was remarkable.
I don't know what was that, Larry. What was the reason for that? Because later on, we've seen the foreign minister of Qatar putting out a photo together with J.D. Vance working on the MOU. Basically, it seems that was the MOU that was signed between Qatar and Iran.
Yeah, well, whatever it was, the message was delivered, and obviously, J.D. Vance made some sort of conciliatory moves towards Qatar. Qatar is in the. I've received, Pepe Escobar and I have received reports that through Pakistani mediation or support, that Qatar and Saudi Arabia are both distancing themselves from the United States. They don't want to be involved anymore in hosting U.S. bases, and have made that clear to the United States. So that I'm thinking, that could be quite important if that happens. And you saw, when you saw the Qatari foreign minister, I mean, he deliberately snubbed Vance, and so I think the Qataris they're not happy with the United States. And when you consider that Al Udeid is the largest U.S. military installation there in the Persian Gulf, that's significant. Because again, Qatar just recently gifted to Donald Trump that his brand new presidential jet, but so there are some mixed signals. But at least yesterday at those negotiations, Qatar was not happy with the U.S. Vance, Vance has sort of got mission impossible here, because he's getting sabotaged back at home, sabotaged by his own president, who said insults and threats and declarations that all did temporarily bring the negotiations to an end. But I think both Trump to a lesser extent, but J.D. Vance recognized there is some. If they don't get this settled quick, or even if they get this settled quick, there are some major economic headwinds headed towards them that will, I think, make a Republican victory in November extremely unlikely.
And you can see in the face of the Qatari foreign minister how critical is the situation in Qatar, because they're under tremendous pressure because of the Strait of Hormuz, Larry.
Yeah.
They don't have any sort of access to send their oil and gas or fertilizer, whatever they have, outside of their country, exporting anything because of the Strait of Hormuz. They don't have access to the Red Sea, right, like Saudi Arabia has. This is the problem for them. They're basically desperate. That's why you see that in the face of the guy.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. The loss of Ras Laffan, the LNG terminal, is significant. So Qatar went from supplying 10% of the world's liquid natural gas to nothing right now, and that's even if they get let's say they get the ceasefire, or the ceasefire is in place, then they get an actual real agreement on the other points in the memorandum of understanding, and that the Strait of Hormuz is now open, and I guess it's back open today, maybe.
It's open. It's back. The strait is open, and you see the latest coming out of the Middle East. It says massive amount of Iranian and Chinese tankers are now exporting oil out of Iran, and I don't know how many.
Yeah, so I'm sitting here looking at it. So I'm seeing one ship called the Sea Eagle, that's destination Singapore, and behind it is the Bangla Joyjatra. I guess it's a Bangladeshi ship. It's heading to Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates. Let's see what else. Anything. There are. So there's several. I see several ships that are, not a lot, but you've got some. But again, this is the problem people don't understand. An estimated 9 to 12% of the total transport fleet, commercial shipping fleet, has been locked up in the Persian Gulf now for 4 months, and so that those ships are sitting in this highly salinated water, lots of salt, and when they find, and they've been sitting there in the heat, and if they had any oil on board, the oil was cooking away. So if they say, okay, now the strait's open, what happens? Well, those ships basically have to get cleaned up and put back into shape to continue doing transport. And the estimates on that is that could take anywhere from 3 weeks to 2 months to get them back in shape. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is, what about the mines? So the ships without insurance, or even ships with insurance, can't sail out of the Persian Gulf until such time as it's certified that it's free of mines. And the United States has said, oh, it's going to take us up to 6 months to get all the mines out. So again, the lack of mine, the presence of mines is going to prevent the majority of these ships from even moving. So there's lots of obstacles that are going to that are creating additional shortages of critical items in the world. Oil, liquid natural gas, urea, sulfur, and helium.
And there was a huge explosion in Qatar yesterday.
Right.
Last night. It was in the Ras Laffan industrial area. And they first thought that someone, I don't know, that was some sort of attack. Later on, they said, no, it wasn't any sort of attack. It was something internal, some sort of technical problem with the industry.
Right.
But do you see any sort of, the Qatari government, they didn't say anything about it, but do you think that it was something internal, some problem, technical problem, or something else?
I really don't know enough about that kind of facility to know what kind of technical problem could set off a blast like that. You also have to consider, was it deliberate sabotage? Was it effort to create a false flag, maybe to try to blame that on Iran? I just don't know.
Larry, this they said that they have established a conflict control unit to stabilize the front lines in the Middle East, including Lebanon. What does that mean for Lebanon? And how is that going to be manageable for the two sides, for Iran and the United States? Are they going to use some sort of combined forces or some third-party forces in the region? Because UN was not successful in the way that they were implementing their mission in those areas, in that region. So what would be the solution?
Well, I really don't know how such a unit would function. And as you correctly note, you've had United Nations forces on the ground there for, good God, 50 years almost. And, they've been victims of much of the violence themselves, and they haven't brought an end to it. So going forward right now, it is the U.S. pressuring Israel. And I think the pressure on Israel includes suspending, not only suspending weapons deliveries and halting further supply of aid. That's number one. But then withdrawing existing U.S. military assets in the area that Israel sees as sort of valuable for itself. So clearly, some message has been communicated to Netanyahu, because they're not, despite all the tough talk, with people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the scale of the violence in Lebanon has dropped significantly. Yeah. So, we just got to go with that. That's what we're seeing. Doesn't mean that now, when will Israel withdraw? That's questionable at this point. There's some indications that General Munir of Pakistan has convinced the Iranian delegation to not press for full withdrawal of Israel from southern Lebanon. Just let that issue percolate for a while.
But staying in Lebanon, I've read the 3 points that Israelis put out last night for you. They're basically, what they're asking for is impossible for anybody in that region, for Iran and for Hezbollah, because it's not about Iran. When they're talking about Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, which is not the case, by the way.
Right.
Lebanon, Hezbollah would decide about, the southern part of Lebanon, the sovereignty of Lebanon. It's not all about Iran putting pressure, because they're a sovereign country, by the way. It's not, they have decided to defend Gaza and Palestinians without telling Iranians. This is the issue that they don't understand it. And the way they want to stay in the southern part of it, they said north of the Litani River, they have to stay out of the northern part of the Litani River. In the southern part, they have to basically dismantle all the infrastructures, and Israel can stay there for forever to defend itself. Basically, staying that, making a zone, a buffer zone, security zone, whatever that would be in the mind of Israelis, the future annexation zone.
Well, again, this has been going on for 51 years, even though they say that the civil war in Lebanon lasted only 15 years, from 75 to 1990. But, the division has been there ever since, going back to 75. And it's been a sectarian war that, people forget that it was back in the early 70s when Palestinians were ousted, forced to flee from Jordan, and then headed into southern Lebanon. And then when Israel came in 1982, again, initially the Palestinians welcomed the Israelis, but then that sentiment quickly went south. So it was out of that incursion of Israel in 1982 that you get Hezbollah forms and becomes a reality. Israel has then made subsequent invasions into Lebanon, and then been forced out. The last big one in 2006. Again, their objective was to reach the Litani River and create this security buffer, and they failed. They're failing this time too. Now that they have done more damage than any time in the past in terms of destroying the infrastructure in the south. A lot of those cities that are along the border, but they still haven't reached their taken control of the territory up to the Litani, and Hezbollah continues to ferociously fight them and inflict significant casualties. Now it's a question of how long can Israel sustain those casualties. I would suggest not very long, but that's just my opinion. I think you're muted.
Has Iran delivered its message, its stance to the United States vis-a-vis the case of Lebanon? Because without Lebanon, there would be no agreement. Was that delivered, in your opinion? And how was that perceived by the Trump administration?
Well, what do you mean was the message delivered? So
because they have to reach the point to understand that without Lebanon, there would be no agreement.
Well,
are they getting to that point? I'm talking about J.D. Vance and those people who are negotiating with Iranians.
Again, I think that point was made when they signed the MOU, because in the MOU, it's acknowledged. The very first thing that's acknowledged is that the United States and Iran and their allies have an obligation to protect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. So, the United States has already, at least on paper, agreed to that. Now, did Donald Trump comprehend what he was signing? Well, I don't think so. But that's what was signed. So you've got to just take that at face value.
I don't know if he knows the clauses of the MOU.
Well, yeah, no,
He was literally yesterday sabotaging everything.
Yeah, he was. Maybe he thought it was helpful. But it was they had a movie out several years ago about the 2008 financial crisis, and it was about how the one Wall Street, this major Wall Street firm that collapsed. The head of it was a guy named Dick Fuld, and he was very aggressive, and he didn't realize how bad things were, and they were trying to sell to save themselves financially by selling to the South Koreans. And at the meeting, finally, Fuld comes in and so basically steps all over the meeting, ends up insulting the South Koreans. The deal falls apart, and his company disappears, goes bankrupt. That's sort of what I saw Donald Trump doing yesterday. I mean, he was like this Dick Fuld character. He said, I'm going to kill you all. You're threatening to murder the delegation. I mean, that's what he did, which is just, that. Then they wondered why the Iranians initially walked out. Now, apparently, after that walkout, the Pakistanis with General Munir, got the Iranians together and say, "Look, guys, let's keep the focus here. Just let's ignore Trump. He's not really the decision maker here. We can get this deal done in a way that's going to give you security." And so Munir is working that very hard. Now, I don't know if you noticed yesterday, while that's going on in Geneva, they had a meeting. The Pakistanis also organized another meeting with the heads of the senior officials from Egypt,
foreign
Turkey.
minister.
There's a foreign minister. So there's the foreign ministers of Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia,
and Pakistan.
Pakistan shared it. So what's going on with that? Well, again, this is part of this effort to build the security infrastructure, and Pakistan recognizes that the case of Sisi in Egypt and Erdogan in Turkey, both men are incredibly corrupt. Erdogan is getting paid off to continue to supply oil to Iran. To Israel, and Egypt is getting paid off on the liquid natural gas front. So, yet both, Munir, I'm told, is working with convincing both of those leaders that you got to recognize that there's more at stake than all the money they're making, and so this is trending towards creating this Muslim Arab military force that will be able to provide security in the Persian Gulf, meaning the U.S. no longer there. The U.S. is no longer relevant.
Yeah. One of the important outcomes of the meeting between the two sides was they're talking about a hotline of communication that has been formed between the United States and Iran, considering the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. That is important because it's totally related to what's going on between Israel and Lebanon, and related to what's going on in the Strait of basically the problem in the Strait of Hormuz, just putting those logistical or somehow regional thing about the mines and all of those issues, putting that aside, basically Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz because of what was happening in Lebanon.
Right. But again, the issue, talking about being closed and open, what does that mean? Because right now, with the threat of mines, most of the ships that are in the Persian Gulf, they're not going to move. Even if it's, quote, "Hey, it's open," they're not going to move because they can't move without the guarantee that if they hit a mine, that the cost is going to be covered. So they stay put. They need the assurance, and Lloyd's is waiting for the assurance. Hey, tell us it's mine free. Now, but the opening, it means Iran can ship all the oil that it can load up and haul out. Looks like Iraq too is putting oil out, and there are there's some others that are doing it at a much reduced level, but the strait is not open it's not really back to business at all from what it was pre 28 February.
Yeah. J.D. Vance said Iranian frozen assets. He said if we release those frozen assets, they're going to buy things from us here in the United States. It was one was soybeans and corn, wheat, and these things they're gonna buy these things from the United States. And this is basically the main issue with the frozen assets. I think they have decided because there was as I've mentioned before, some sort of MOU, memorandum of understanding, was signed between Iran and Qatar. It seems it's all related to frozen Iranian assets in Qatar.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. But, I mean, that there are a number of countries that hold the actual assets, physically have them, and so they're in a position to return. Again, then we return to the body language of the Qatari foreign minister with J.D. Vance. Based on that, I said, yeah, Qatar's turning the money back over to Iran. They don't care what the United States says.
Yeah. Well, by the way, after all, what is the benefit of keeping that money in your account when your country is getting destroyed by the conflict in the region with the case?
Yeah. Well, and again, the economic cost for Qatar, the production of the LNG and the helium. So helium's the big one. That's again, that's another commodity that nobody's really focused on what the effects have been in the global industry. But when I saw Tim Cook, the head of Apple, come out the other day and say, yeah, we're going to have to raise the price of our products because the chips cost more. Well, that's helium is used to make the computer chips. So right away, they said that it would appear that the cost of production has gone up significantly.
Yeah. They were talking about the nuclear program, but it seems that it was all dependent on the clause 13 in the MOU, which basically is talking about the sanctions coming from IAEA, from UN Security Council, primary and secondary sanctions in the United States. I think this is hugely problematic for the Trump administration. I don't know about the sanctions of the UN and IAEA, but primary and secondary sanctions in the United States are basically dependent on the Congress. It's not about Donald Trump. Is he going to get it from the Congress? Does he have the power to?
I just saw the news flash on my screen. So Iran has agreed to allow nuclear inspectors, it said.
No, if the final agreement is reached, not right now.
Well, I'm just saying how it's being reported with Al Jazeera.
Exactly. They didn't mention that. They're going to accept that if the final agreement is reached, which is basically the clause number 13. Whole sanctions.
And that's the thing folks just aren't appreciating, that Iran is it's clearly defined its position, what it wants and what it will accept. It is getting pressure from Pakistan, but the other element here that is at play is the Pakistanis are saying that they received information that Israel was going to assassinate General Munir.
Oh.
And Pepe has talked about this in his recent post. So people say, well, that's not true. Well, all I can tell you is that's what the Pakistanis believe.
Yeah.
And
it's important, which is so important.
Yeah, if they believe that, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It matters. That's what they believe, and they're going to act and react accordingly. And but they seem very confident of the information that they've received. So if that, again, I caveat it with, if that is true, what you're looking at is if Israel made such an attempt. Pakistan has recently tested a ballistic missile capable of reaching Israel. And Pakistan does have nuclear weapons. So if there was an attempt to kill someone like Munir, you can see a devastating response. In fact, the Pakistanis said to a mutual to this person I'm talking to that Israel would cease to function as a society if they did this. So it was, that's some of the background drama going on. But it was fascinating yesterday to watch that basically the people coming in and genuflecting before the Pakistani delegation. Munir cuts a very impressive figure. I mean, he's tall, charismatic, has that demeanor of a general that's in charge. Whereas Prime Minister Sharif,
Yeah.
he looks like a vegetable vendor. Nice little man. Oh, what a nice little guy, but nothing formidable about him. So, and then the combination of Qatar and Pakistan working together to bring all this, to keep this circus going forward. So, the fact that the United States is there just shows you how this is a desperate situation. We haven't fully felt the economic ramifications, but we're going to. It's sort of unavoidable.
I think Asim Munir, Field Marshal Asim Munir, he's so important, as you've mentioned, considering the political system in Pakistan. Many people may not know, but he's the most powerful figure in Pakistan.
Yeah, it was explained to me that when Imran Khan was president, and Munir was basically the head of the army, that initial Munir insisted that he was going to call the shots, and Khan said, "No, I'm going to call the shots." And Munir said, "Okay," and ultimately had him arrested and jailed so that Munir could call the shots. Now, I have heard some say that they view Munir as just a puppet of the United States. No, I don't believe that at all, because Munir is acting in Munir's interests, or in the interests of what he feels is best for Pakistan. And he's not beholden to the United States for anything that I see at this point. So but the Pakistanis they're not just in this by themselves, because they are in close consultations with primarily China, but also Russia. And for the Russians and Chinese, this goes to this broader issue of a regional new security architecture in the Persian Gulf. And that's a game changer. It gets to, and the economic dimensions of this is to free these Gulf countries and be independent upon the petrodollar and dependent upon the United States. And that's the real war that's being fought, even though it's not advertised and not recognized as such.
If you were telling me before the war started against Iran that Pakistan would play a key role in the whole region, I would say, no, that's not possible.
Yeah.
We don't have the history of that in the region. I thought India could be that player, but India somehow...
Well, apparently there is a protege of Munir. I think his name is Najib. Is quite close to the Mujtaba Khamenei, or at least one of the people close to Mujtaba Khamenei. So there is the communication, and the communication it's not just with Pezeshkian, it's not just with Arakchi, it's also with Mujtaba Khamenei. So the Pakistanis got the whole thing covered. They really have. It is fascinating how they've resurrected themselves, made themselves a critical player in this whole drama.
Larry, the other day I said to our audience here on this podcast, I did a solo here, but many Pakistan and Iran have huge, deep, connections
Mhm.
culturally and traditionally when it comes to the language. Do you know the national anthem of Pakistan is in Persian?
No, I didn't.
Their language is Urdu, but their national anthem is in Persian. Just to see how deep is the relationship between
So,
Iran and
this I don't know. How different is the Urdu language from the Persian language?
they basically from the 11th century till 19th century they were speaking Persian because of the empire, the Mughal empire and Islamic dynasty. They adopt the Persian language as an official language. So basically Pakistan and the northern part of India, they were all speaking in Persian.
Okay.
So what has happened right now in Urdu today, we have something like 40 or 60% of Persian in their language. And
Yeah. Would you draw a parallel like the difference between Spanish and Portuguese is Urdu and
exactly.
Farsi?
Exactly.
Is like
I can, because I know Portuguese and Spanish. When someone speaks Spanish, I totally understand what he's talking about. I can communicate since I know Portuguese. So you see the connection there.
yeah.
And-
I didn't know that. So
Yeah.
here, well, I'm learning something new today.
Yeah, it's huge. It's
Yeah.
huge, by the way. It's not about the leaderships coming together. It's about the, how the two society are so much connected. Not only with Pakistan, go to northern part of India. You see that connection going there as well.
Yeah. Well, and then they also have a common security interest with the Baluchis.
Yeah.
So the Baluchi independence movement, which it's in Iran and it's in Pakistan, it spills over. Again, this is one of those tribal things that where the two nations have a common interest in trying to rein in the Baluchis. So yeah, that's what we're seeing, that this new relationship, and Pakistan has the added advantage. They got nukes, they have nuclear weapons, and when they provided a security guarantee, they're bringing something to the table that Turkey can't. Turkey doesn't have nukes.
And you see that yesterday in that video that the foreign minister of Qatar is coming, the way that he's greeting the prime minister of Pakistan, Asim Munir, hugging each other, kissing somehow each other.
Yeah.
And you see that sort of relationship. This is huge for the region, Larry. I don't know how to emphasize how important is that, because this government is just bringing all of them together. It's good because the United States is part of that. The United States, they have good relationship with the United States. They have good relationship with China, with Iran, with GCC countries. That's huge, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it is. I think it has dawned upon some in the Trump administration that they're getting aced out of this, pushed to the side. That the previous role of the United States to have this be seen as the preeminent power in the Persian Gulf, that myth has now been exploded. That was one of the consequences of this Ramadan war, we'll call it that. That they suddenly realized that the U.S. has limited power, and now here's Pakistan, really running rings around the United States. The United States has to come to Pakistan to try to, tell the Iranians to stop, please, because we can't sustain this.
I think the two ways for Donald Trump right now: is he more concerned about the economy and the way that the Strait of Hormuz can be used against his, his position, his administration, the aim, the objectives they have in Washington?
Yeah.
Or he wants to go, I see, Larry, what's going on in Israel. They're basically accepting that they were defeated with this war, but they don't want to accept that this is the end for Israel.
Yeah,
We cannot go-
So, I mean, sorry to interrupt, just a question, because if I recall, there's like 92% of the Israelis believe
yeah,
that they lost the
exactly,
war.
92%.
Yeah.
And within the Likud party, it's more than 90. It's 93.4%. They believe that they were. This is huge. This is devastating for Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, but that's actually good in the sense that the Israelis are not delusional or completely delusional. They at least acknowledge, yeah, we lost. We took a beating. And
That's why, Larry, I was always asking you, Larry, how the society in Israel can be re-educated. I think they have been under the Netanyahu and Likud party's influence for such a long time because they thought that they are the sole superpower in the Middle East. They can do whatever they want with impunity, going to Gaza, going to Lebanon, to Syria. Those days are gone. I think they're getting to that point, or somehow the reality is forcing them in that direction. That could be some sort of change in Israel.
well, I would argue that the only way Israel can actually survive and remain intact as a nation is through negotiation. Now, it's not easy, and it's going to be terribly painful. But the only way forward for Israel to survive is to accept and recognize the state of Palestine.
Yeah.
That the Palestinian people that they must share that land, up to and including that Jerusalem itself must become a shared city that's not dominated by any one group, but is acknowledged that it has a history for all peoples. You know, the Zionists like to go out and make this argument that there is no such thing as a quote Palestine, an official organized entity, but these people that lived there that we now know as Palestinians, they were there for centuries. It's not like these, basically European Jews that showed up and claimed, okay, this is our historical home. They had no, biological roots to that land in last 1,000 years, but nonetheless took it upon themselves to say, hey, this is ours. So that there's going to have to be some sort of negotiated settlement ultimately, and getting these crazy settlers out of the West Bank, that can be easy. That's almost 1 million of them, and they're quite vocal, quite aggressive, and they're moving still to expand their control over territory, which will further, that's going to lead to further fighting. So this is, there is no easy, quick solution here, but the real, I guess, the part of the story that we don't really know how it will end is how much economic damage to the world economy has been done by this last 4 months. That when you suspend or cut off 20% of the supply of oil, 25% of the natural gas, 35% of urea, sulfur, 40% of helium, that has a dampening effect on the global economy. Now, where specifically and to what degree, I haven't yet seen a good analysis on that. I'm sure somebody is out there has thought about it and actually has written about it. But, that is why Trump made such a dramatic reversal in being willing to sign off on the MOU when before he was dragging his feet.
Larry, how the MOU and the total withdrawal from Lebanon, if happens, as an outcome of MOU, would benefit Palestinians?
Well, it could actually make life worse for the Palestinians from the standpoint that Israel will no longer be distracted with Lebanon and will turn its full military force on the remaining, Hamas in Gaza. So, there's no guarantee that getting that settled. Now, the Iranians in their demand didn't about ending all the conflicts implicitly implied that Gaza was included in that. Now, whether they will explicitly come out and say, hey, this has to include Gaza as well, or else no deal, that remains to be seen.
But I think the withdrawal from Lebanon would bring some sort of hope in the whole community, whole region, that if the United States can force Israel out of Lebanon, they can force Israel out of Gaza, out of the West Bank.
Yeah.
And that could bring, the reality to not only Iran, because the whole region, it's about the whole region, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, GCC countries, Iran, Egypt, all together, they have to, because they have a peace plan, by the way.
Yeah.
That's the problem, one of the obstacles for Iran.
Well, at this point, I think it's highly unlikely just because there are so many members of the Trump administration that are diehard Zionists. And they are in place throughout the Department of War, the Department of State, the CIA, the Director of National Intelligence, etc. So you're right. It's something that should happen, but I think it's unlikely to happen.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today.
All right. So I'm not seeing you today at 5. Okay.
Where truth matters. Hope you had a restful weekend and you are ready for next week, for the new week, per se. Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu just got hit with the ultimate strategic blindside. That's the only way I could think about it. Only 3 days after the digitally signing ceremony of this peace deal and the MOU, that is, Iran did the unthinkable and slammed the Strait of Hormuz shut, catching the U.S. and the Israeli intelligence agencies completely off guard. While Washington scrambles and Tel Aviv faces some sort of a sudden now multi-front nightmare. One terrifying question remains, and the question is, how did the two most sort of strong, some might call them powerful militaries on earth, let themselves get outmarched by a single geographic trap? Now, I found it very fascinating. It's just how we just underestimated where things are. As of now, Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz once again, even though the U.S. Central Command is stating as of this morning, oh, Strait of Hormuz, the traffic is fine, ships are moving. It's a lie. So in this live stream, in this analysis, I'm going to share with you, first of all, what prompted Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz again. Then I'm going to provide you the geopolitical context, and I will conclude with one particular development of an event that I'm going to do a live stream for you about it. It's just I am waiting for confirmation. And that particular development, in my opinion, is what prompted Saudi Arabia to lash out at Israel. Very, very interesting dynamics as things evolve and move forward. So what we have basically, we have Iran announced the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Let me put the map for you. Oh no, this is the thumbnail for that one. Let me put the right there. Closure of the Strait of Hormuz in response to the continued Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon. alleging that the United States, this is what, it's not alleging, this is exactly what Iran stated on the record, is that the United States failed to rein in Israel. That violated now the newly signed ceasefire agreement, because one of the first clauses in that MOU was that Israel has to halt its operation in Lebanon. And Iran made it clear that the US will be held responsible if Israel violates that. Well, here we are. That tells you right there who's in charge. When Donald Trump is saying, oh, I told Bibi Netanyahu to stop. Come on, man. Get real and stop lying. It's the other way around. You taking orders from Tel Aviv, not the other way around. So now the way we're going to look at this is we're going to look at this sudden move that occurs, as I mentioned earlier, only 3 days after this. Now you have the vital shipping lanes reopened. They were reopened 3 days ago, 4 days ago then. And that following the interim memorandum of understanding. That is why, if you recall, I used the term, this is not a final deal. It's the surrender deal. That's the reality of it. And that's when you have the US president sign Donald Trump in Versailles. You all remember that clip I shared with you. And the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, both of them signed to end this regional war there. So what I wanted to do is I want to share with you some key factors behind Iran's action, because you need to understand these dynamics. And I'm going to play some clips pertaining to this, and I'll play clips towards the end. So make sure you stay with me till the end. First of all, we have the ceasefire violation, because here is what the Iran Central Command, military command, said and accused that the US of a bad faith and a clear breach of its commitments by failing to end the fighting in Lebanon and secure a complete withdrawal of the Israeli forces. If the US has this much power over Israel, then they would have been able to do it, but they couldn't. And that is exactly where, and I'm going to play a clip for you here pertaining to exactly what I'm talking about. This way, you'll have an idea. Take a look, take a listen, take a look, and take a listen, please. There we go.
On an insane murder. Israelis are going on an insane murder spree in Lebanon right now. They're doing this to violate the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran. And you know what? They've been successful. Iran just closed the Strait of Hormuz. Back to square one. Subscribe for more.
And it tells you right there. That means the U.S. has no power whatsoever. They couldn't control the Israelis. The other thing, it has to do with preservation of Hezbollah. And here is what some objective analysts are seeing this. They are noting that Iran is treating the ceasefire or the sort of the cessation of the military actions against Hezbollah as a red line. And like I mentioned last time, I remember before I left the US last time, I mentioned to you that, did you notice that there are no more strikes against Ansarullah, the Houthis? It's because they understand, meaning in this case, US and Israel, understand that Iran supports Ansarullah by providing some really heavy weapons. The same applies to Hezbollah. And Hezbollah to Iran is a red line, meaning if Israel crosses it, Iran will do what it has to do. And this is why you have the explicit conditioning, the border peace agreement, on a permanent halt of operations in Lebanon. That is one of the things. The other one has to do with the diplomatic leverage. All this on behalf of Iran. The diplomatic leverage, which I will get into the nitty-gritty of it, what happened in Switzerland, by the way, or in Pakistan first. The closure announcements coincided with the departure of the Iranian and the US delegations, including US Vice President J.D. Vance. Where is his picture? Right here. J.D. Vance to Switzerland, to Bergenstock in Switzerland for high-stake technical negotiations. Well, guess what happened? Iran just walked away. And I'm going to show you a clip that proves it and a proof for you to see what happens. The bottom line to this particular aspect is that for Iran, Iran is using the threat of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. But it wasn't just a threat, they follow through. This is what I always believe. And again, to those who disagree with me, I appreciate your opinion and so forth. I always believe that Iranians do not bluff. They don't lie. And if they say something, they're going to follow through. And here's the example. Because they told Donald Trump through these negotiators and so forth, if Israel violates this agreement by attacking Hezbollah, we will close the Strait of Hormuz. And here we are. But on the other hand, Iran has a very, very strategic calculation, especially economic one. That means what? The closure of the Strait of Hormuz will exert maximum economic pressure. That in itself will allow Iran to gain a stronger negotiating hand, because the ball is in the U.S. court, not in Iran. Iran has the upper hand. It's the U.S. that is facing now the midterm and the fear of Donald Trump of being impeached if the Democrats end up winning both chambers in Congress. It's automatic impeachment. I'm even starting to think maybe Donald Trump is going to resign if it became clear that the Congress, both houses in Congress are going to be in a firm grip of the Democrats. The other aspects of all this has to do with the demand for oil waiver. Why is this important? Because the Iranian state media outlet reported that Iran intended to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed until the Lebanon ceasefire holds, and explicit waivers allowing the unrestricted sale of Iranian oil are formally issued. That means what? Even though the U.S. said, oh, we allow Iran's oil to be sold on, it's not formal. The Iranians understand how the Americans operate. You can't trust the American government or take it at its own word. This is why it's important to understand these dynamics. Now we are looking at the geopolitical standoff, because that is what it is right now. The U.S. military, Central Command, that is because most of this part of the world, any issue, any statement has to come through the Central Command. What they are disputing now, they are disputing Iran's claim of controlling the waterways. You know, are we going to trust what the U.S. government is saying? So the Central Command is stated on the record that the Strait of Hormuz remains open. I checked this morning, and it is not. And they're saying, well, traffic continues to flow, and American forces are actively monitoring the area to ensure security. No. This is just a fluff. It has nothing to do with the reality on the ground. And in response to this, Iran, in response to this announcement by Iran, Donald Trump threatened severe consequences, warning that the U.S. could take full physical control of the shipping lane. And here is where the kicker is. You know what he added? He added that the U.S. will levy a 20% guardian angel transit tax on passing oil crude if the peace deal completely collapses. I think Trump is living in some la-la land of sort. He's not thinking straight, in my opinion. Basically, what he's saying is we're going to control the Strait of Hormuz, and we're going to put a fee for a transit fee for any ship that wants to cross the Strait of Hormuz, 20%. And basically, which country is going to be taxed for this? It will be the Gulf states, because most of their oil has to go through the Strait of Hormuz, or the rest of the world for that matter. Remember, 20 to 21% of the global oil energy, or the global energy rather, transit through the Strait of Hormuz. And this is where, to me, I take a step back and put my geopolitical analyst hat, and I'm finding myself asking one specific question. And that's really, by the way, for our wonderful community, I would love to have your feedback in the chat box, what you think about it. So the question is, that I'm thinking about, is between the Strait of Hormuz and the nuclear power. Remember, the whole reason for why Donald Trump ended up going to the war on behalf of Israel, of course, is because of the nuclear file on nuclear power. So if we are to think between the Strait of Hormuz, and the nuclear power, what did Iran learn from the 110-day war as of today, as of June 19th? Because June 19th was 110 days. So in your opinion, just put a word or two. How do you see it? So to me, the way I see this is that following the 110-day war, which started on February 28th up to June 17, not 19, I take this back. June 17 marks 110. So we are now on June 22nd, and another 5 days, so we are 115 days. What has Iran learned? Iran leadership has walked away with a radical transformation in its military doctrine. You know why? Because they realized that controlling the Strait of Hormuz is more effective, cheaper, and faster than building a nuclear bomb or nuclear weapon. But don't get me wrong, it does not mean that Iranian leadership, especially now that Mujtaba has the support of the IRGC, will not go that route. All I'm saying is, for now, that is the first lesson they have learned. And I can see why. Because the joint operation, the joint US and Israeli operation Epic Fury, even though it says it decapitated Iran's leadership, yeah, you killed the supreme leader Ali Khamenei, you killed some top generals and so forth, and degraded to a degree the conventional forces. With all this happening, Iran discovered something far beyond that the US, Israel, or any other country for that matter could not control. Even technology won't be able to control it. And I think that discovery centered around geography, because geography could successfully defeat a high-tech warfare. That is exactly the lesson Iran has now learned after 115 days. It tells you right there, shows you right there where things are. So both the US and Israel are being now holding the end of the stick, per se. And the other key takeaway, the strategic ones, that is, we're not talking about tangible here. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about the Iran's key strategic takeaways from this 115-day conflict. And I'm going to share 2 or 3 with you because it makes perfect sense to understand this. Hormuz is Iran's real nuclear option. Washington is coming to now start to realize, what are we doing here? First of all, following blindly Israel. Second, Israel is going to drag the US into another major conflict. Third is that, could the US make that decision by saying, you know what, Israel, you deal with it. And I'm going to address this point towards the end of this live stream. And here is where Western intelligence agencies, we're talking basically 2 or 3 here. We're talking DIA, we're talking actually 4, DIA, CIA, Amman, and Mossad. The ultimate goal for this Western intelligence was, Iran's ultimate goal was a nuclear warhead. Well, they were off, excuse me. The war proved that weaponizing the Strait of Hormuz provided immediate asymmetrical leverage on the global stage. That is the key, what Iran concluded, and that is the failure of the Western intelligence agency. And when you look at the economic aspect of this, the economic choke point, or chokehold, if I may use the term here, by choking off global energy shipments, which, by the way, we are impacted. We reach, I looked at yesterday, I read the recent assessments of the SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserves. We have about 340 million barrels. That's about it. That's not much. We're getting closer to the danger zone. So this global energy shipment is not impacting Asia or Africa, what have you. It's impacting us also. And this is why Iran successfully triggered the global fuel crisis and fractured the international market without firing a shot. The second thing, it has to do with deterrence over technology. That falls back to my earlier point about the importance of geography. This is why in the field of political science, there's a specific discipline called political geography. And that's part of, by the way, where geopolitics came from, the terminology of it. So, deterrence over technology. The hardline officials noted that geography plays a major role in really taking over technology, because what they have proved, meaning Iran in this case, the IRGC, the decision makers inside Tehran, what they have proved is that disrupting global trade created a more immediate existential threat to Washington than a nuclear bomb will do, as of now. So then you're going to have to think in terms the other aspects of it. The thinking from Iran's perspective is that the settlement of necessity, and that falls back to the nuclear rights, Iran's nuclear right for enriching uranium for civilian technology. And that is what Iran also learned, that its nuclear program was more valuable as a permanent bargaining chip than an assembled weapon. Because once the weapon is done, and I can see the logical argument coming out of individuals inside Tehran. The best example to think of this is North Korea. And North Korea developed the nuclear weapon, but this is it. That's it. Is the US sitting down negotiating with North Korea? No. They are not. They are not. That is where the difference. And that's why these settlements of necessity. So, but at the same time, Iran will preserve the enrichment despite facing devastating maximum pressure from the US and Israel through the strikes, which aimed at forcing an unconditional surrender. Iran successfully resisted the total capitulation. And as a matter of fact, Donald Trump signed the surrender deal. So, and Israel is going to end up in a really, really bad spot, given what's coming. There is something coming up down the pipe, and we'll talk about it in due time. And that is, again, where Iran was very shrewd and smart into this, because that's what we call the leverage oversight. They have a leverage. Under the newly MOU that was signed, Tehran agreed to international oversight, but firmly protected its right to conduct civilian uranium enrichment on its own soil. That tells you right there, they didn't give up anything. And that is, again, with this, it leads you to understand the asymmetric defiance that outlasts conventional supremacy that the US and Israel are displaying. So despite losing, in the case of Iran, despite losing its supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, despite losing major air defense systems, despite the conventional naval assets, Iran realized it did not need conventional military parity to fight the United States to a standstill, or Israel for that matter. You all remember early June when Iran fired missiles at Israel. The Iron Dome was useless. So, and that's why Iran went ahead with the small and conventional approach, using small, fast attack boats, using naval mines, using mobile ballistic missiles. All this played a role in really shaping the trajectory of the conflict, or the war for that matter. And realized, and Israel and the US realized that they just couldn't keep up with all this. And this is why, and you add to this one, is when Iran issued the blockade. Because he maintained this blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, inflicting enough economic damage to induce US war fatigue. That's exactly the strategy of Iran. And by doing that, it's forcing Donald Trump to shift from demanding unconditional surrender to signing the surrender deal, or paper, or documents, or agreement or whatever term you would like to use. And I did use the term surrender. And there are some well-established geopolitical analysts agree with my assessment as well. And I'm going to share a clip with you to prove it to you. And the other aspect is, one of the key aspects has to do with the shift. We're talking about the pivot towards the Eastern Shield, which is very important. Realizing that Western diplomatic, some sort of agreement are highly volatile. Why? Because the US goes back and forth. Israel undermines anything the US does or trying to agree with Iran on. So Iran's surviving leadership has doubled down on a sort of where things are going, not only domestically, but how to deal with the US and Israel moving forward. And that's, to me, is the key factor in deciding the trajectory of what lies ahead, which will be my next segment after this clip. If the truth matters to you, hit like, subscribe, and tap that bell. No spin, no agenda, just the stories they don't want you to know. Don't watch from the sideline. Be part of the movement. Your support keeps the truth alive. Thank you. Indeed. So the next question I'm asked is the Strait of Hormuz a lesson in deterrence? Once again, I find it as, pardon me. I find it as a logical question to ask. Because the Strait of Hormuz is the world's premier lesson in geographic and economic deterrence. That's why the rest of the world now is watching. The 115-day war proved that controlling global energy checkpoints provide a non-nuclear state with a geopolitical kill switch that can rival the deterrent effect of a nuclear bomb. Yeah, some say, well, it might not be the same degree, Dr. O. Well, of course, it will not be the same degree. But just think about what China will be thinking about the Strait of Malacca, or Singapore for that matter, or Indonesia, or Malaysia. That's my point. Think about the Bab el-Mandeb right there. Think about the Red Sea. Think about certain areas within the Black Sea. That's my point. So, because the Strait of Hormuz redefined the asymmetric deterrence. That's exactly what happened with now what Iran just did by closing the Strait of Hormuz once again. It made the point that geography beats high-tech warfare, as I mentioned earlier. So, and I'm not going to repeat myself here. So the other thing you need to think about it is the terms of, we know this between the US and between the US and Russia, between US and China, the MAD, it's called the MAD, mutual assured destruction. Okay, there is something also similar to this that I am coming to realize with this moves by Iran, and that it could be used as this MAE, mutual assured economic destruction. That's the way I see it, because traditional reliance relies on the threat of a nuclear complete destruction, right? The Strait of Hormuz introduced something different, a new model, if I may use the term, economic destruction. Because just for Iran, by threatening to cut off 20% of the world petroleum, Iran can instantly trigger global inflation if it wants to. Stock markets crashes and the political unrest in Western democracies. All it needs to do is shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And that in itself allows it because of a low cost, high leverage defense. That's exactly the strategy of Iran. And it seems to be succeeding at it at this point. So building and maintaining a nuclear arsenal invites crushing sanctions, international isolation, and the constant threat of preemptive military strikes. In contrast, when you think about the different approach, leveraging the Strait of Hormuz in the case of Iran, cost Iran very little. It relies on a natural geography. And at the same time, it provides diplomatic leverage. And what do I mean by that diplomatic leverage? Is by when Iran will force this great power, superpower, whatever you want to call it, America in this case, to negotiate. And the ultimate proof of Hormuz's deterrent power was the shift in American strategy. The sign-in, remember the surrender deal, despite launching a devastating airstrike during Operation Epic Fury. You know, everybody was under the impression, oh, the US and Israel is going to crash. It's going to bomb carpet bombing of Iran and render it like flatland. None of that happened. Because the US ultimately abandoned its demand for Iran unconditional surrender. You all remember this. It's on a record. Go back and check Donald Trump's first speech after he gave the order for the attack. And we won't accept, and I'm paraphrasing here, this is what Donald Trump said, we will not accept anything less than unconditional surrender. No, because what we just saw happened in Versailles. We saw him, he chose to sign. Even though Western media call it a negotiated ceasefire, I call it a surrender deal. For one reason, to get the oil flowing again, especially for the US. And if the Central Command is coming by saying, oh, the traffic in Strait of Hormuz is open, ships are crossing. No, it's a lie. It is a lie. Because what it has showed and what Iran demonstrated, it demonstrated to the rest of the world that whatever the US is saying regarding maritime security is limited, or maritime deterrence is limited. So, and that is exactly where you have to understand how Iran is navigating this very, very shrewdly. Using the Strait of Hormuz as a weapon requires Iran to actively disrupt global commerce. That's where, I mean, Iran will get impacted also economically. But this risk completely aligning it or sort of alienate its economic or crucial economic partners, like China in this case. But at the same, because China relies heavily on Persian Gulf oil. But of course, Chinese at some point will step in if they start to realize it's starting to have major effect on the domestic production inside China. For now, China is not saying anything yet. So, and this leads me to the next question. And the next question is, what's next in the Iran-US Israel conflict? So, because the next phase of the US-Iran conflict centers on a high-stakes race between diplomatic technical negotiations in Switzerland and the imminent of renewed maritime warfare in the Persian Gulf. Don't assume that we are going back to diplomacy permanently. No. The military option is still on the table, except it's not going to favor the US or Israel in this case. Why? Because you have another country now that is stepping forward. And I'm going to disclose this to you towards the end. So think about this one. And I'm going to take you quickly to the Switzerland, where JD Vance is right now, where the Iranian delegation is right now. But as a matter of fact, the Iranian delegation just walked away. It walked out completely. So yesterday, 48 hours, it was disclosed that both the delegations, negotiators from Washington and from Tehran are converging in Bundestag in Switzerland to hash out the final details of the interim memorandum of understanding, which means it's not final. But the problem is, of course, the US delegation was led by the Vice President J.D. Vance, and what the American delegation already going with this attitude of, oh, you know what, we're going to push for the strict, permanent international oversight of Iran civilian uranium enrichment. You know, it's like we're going back to square one. You know, you think the American negotiators have learned something from the last few months? Apparently not. Because here is what the US is demanding also. US is demanding explicit, verifiable guarantees that Iran will never again close or mine the Strait of Hormuz. Well, I say to Washington, good luck with that. Because what happened as soon as the delegation arrived, by the way, Donald Trump issued a threat against the delegation. As a matter of fact, there were reports of the possibility of assassinating one of the negotiators. That's Mohammed. His name is Mohammed Bakir Kalibaf. He's a politician. He's a former IRGC brigadier general who served as the Speaker of Parliament of Iran since 2020. And as of April 2026, he has been described as handling the strategic matters of Iran. And this is why the delegation of Iran walked out. They walked out in protest after Donald Trump threatened to strike Iran's over its support for Hezbollah. I mean, you would think that Donald Trump have learned something. Apparently not. Not the case. And that is why we're seeing what we are seeing. They're shocked about when Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz with at a short moment notice. Nobody knew it was coming. So I'm going to share a clip with you to show you, because I like to show you proof of where things are. This is in Switzerland, and it just happened, and I confirmed it this morning before I upload it to my computer to share it with you. Take a listen, please.
Delegation refuses to shake hands with the U.S. The Iranian delegation refuses to shake hands with the U.S. delegation. So I guess things aren't going too well with these peace talks in Switzerland. Subscribe.
So that's the delegation leaving Switzerland. So that means what? There is no talks, no need to talk, because Iran made it clear: till you force Israel to halt its attacks on Lebanon, Iran is moving forward with whatever it needs to do. So, and that leads us to address the maritime flashpoint, because now with this happening, because the diplomatic talks, while they are, I don't even know if there are any open talks. To me, there's nothing. One thing is factual, one thing is sure, is that the situation in the waters, the Strait of Hormuz, remain incredibly volatile as of today, especially after Iran went ahead and shut down the Strait of Hormuz. That is the key to all this. An Iran unilateral declaration closing the Strait of Hormuz now created some sort of an operational paradox. Paradox for whom? For Iran? No, it's for the US, because the US has no options. Basically, we have lost the war. We're just now trying to figure out how we can get out of it. Trump has no other alternative but to sort of formally agree to that surrender deal he signed that is going to go into effect. Because remember, it was just a memorandum of understanding. It's not official yet. So, and that is why when you hear, and I read the statement this morning from the Central Command, which I do not believe, this blockade, the U.S. Central Command insists that the strait is open and traffic is flowing safely under American military monitoring. Well, I have my doubt on that. So, but at the same time, the U.S. is asking now is going to levy a 20% transit fee. All of a sudden, the U.S. will be making money out of that. It's kind of, it's absurd how U.S. doesn't see the reality for what it is. So, and that is why now Donald Trump is issuing these threats. He warned that any physical attempt by Iran to disrupt shipping will trigger a full, aggressive U.S. military seizure of the waterways. Well, here we are. Iran already shut down the Strait of Hormuz. What are you going to do about it? That's why my point for highlighting this is to highlight to you that the world has now come to a sure reality, is that all the U.S. is doing is bluffing. That's it. And this, Iran has proved the U.S. that it's just bluffing, no more, no less. Of course, I cannot overlook the wild cards. And the wild cards, my reference is to the escalation risks. I'm not going to rule that out. And I've said it a month and a half ago. Despite these negotiations, despite the role of Pakistan, despite whatever, I still will not trust, because even, and here is the way I see it, and again, I am talking based on facts. I've been around long enough to know how Washington operates. I was inside Washington. What I foresee is, even if the dust settles on this, and if this doesn't end according to what Iran wants, we could revisit this issue 8, 9, or 10 years from today. That is why I'm seeing with the US statements of the Guardian Angel transit tax, that's a hint for what lies ahead. 20% tariff on crude oil transit in the Strait of Hormuz? Yeah, just think about it. Of course, the Gulf Arab states will be happy to pay. I just don't know how they live with themselves. But at the same time, you start seeing now some changes because they depend so much on oil. If it weren't for oil, we won't be talking about the Gulf states. Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Oman, for that matter. We won't be talking about that. But to be fair, they are moving into a different direction, different trajectory. And the way you can tell that they are is by having, which I show you a clip of it, is by having the foreign minister of Qatar snobbing J.D. Vance. Didn't even shake hands with him. It's because Qatar was hoping that the U.S. will defend it. It did not. Saudi Arabia was hoping that U.S. will defend it. It did not. United Arab Emirates, it did not. So that's my point. And the bigger of them all is the Israeli-Lebanon factor, because Iran, here is the thing, Iran directly links the Strait of Hormuz closure to the Israeli action in southern Lebanon. And any major breakdown of the ceasefire on Israeli northern border will instantly sort of trigger. It will trigger a corresponding escalation in the Persian Gulf. And as a result, the negotiations or the talks in Switzerland will be absolutely, useless. Anyway, and I think it's going into that direction, moving forward. When you have the delegation walks out, they didn't even, as a matter of fact, the Americans, I got a word that the Americans wants to take a picture with the Iranian delegations. And the Iranian delegation said, no, we don't want pictures with you. We don't want that. It's the same argument Donald Trump made about the prime minister of Italy. I don't have a single picture of Donald Trump. That's why I showed this one. Giorgia Meloni, he's saying that Giorgia Meloni is begging him for a picture. It's idiotic, But again, what people voted for. So they have to live with the consequences of that vote. So. And I'm getting to the end here, but before I do the conclusion, there is one serious issue that we're going to have to address. And that issue is, or the question rather, is Israel screwed? And the part of that question is, can it fight Iran alone? Which, by the way, 79% of you said Israel would not be able to go at it alone. That was the question that I asked back then in the survey. So, of course, you have Western analysts are saying, oh, no. No, Israel is not helpless. Israel has advanced systems, Air Force and all that, which is true. I'm not denying that. It's just when they say that Israel possesses overwhelming technological and conventional military superiority, well, yeah. How did this hold up when Iran launched missiles and the Iron Dome failed to intercept? How did it hold up when Iran launched Khorramshahr 4, destroying parts of Ben Gurion Airport? Where was this technological advancement? Where was the Iron Dome? And that's my point. Because if we are to look at it logically, If I am to put the map of the West Asia, just from here, think of it just from here, but it will not show what exactly I want to show you. What I want to show you is right there. Think about the distance from where Israel is and where Iran is. It's not a small distance. And with that, you have to think about the strategic doctrine that is fundamentally for Israel, that is built on geographic limitations. That's what I'm saying, geography. Iran is using geography as a weapon now. It's because for Israel, the short conflict, the U.S. logistical backing, assuming it doesn't have any of that if it wants alone. That's why a solo war for Israel against Iran will push Israel to its absolute strategic and economic defeat and complete destruction. So they better think. And as a matter of fact, there's now an upcoming elections inside Israel, and it makes you just wonder about the political scene, that not all Israelis are seeing what Netanyahu is doing is right. And that's why I disagree with some analysts that have argued that, oh, Israel is highly capable. Yeah, I'm not denying that it has the weapons, because we give it all the advanced weapons, but at the same time, it proved that when Iran started launching the hypersonic, the Iron Dome or the sling, David sling, or the Arrow 2-3 stood no chance. So if you have these advanced weapons, that, you know, same for us when we were in the Red Sea and Ansarullah start firing missiles, we realized that what if they have something that can sink an aircraft carrier? We didn't know what they have. So, and we end up moving the Harry Truman up north, the Red Sea, far away from the reach of the missile. And I'm not, you know, those analysts are entitled to their opinion. And I'm just pushing back against something that I was on the ground. I spent a lot of time in the region. I'm very familiar with really how things work because I was in the middle of some of that. It's just when they are saying, oh, there is unmatched missile defense, because they're saying Israel possesses the most advanced multi-layer air defense, the Iron Dome, the David Sling, and Arrow, and so forth. And I find myself have to push back against that narrative, because this kind of defense system proved that it could not withstand the barrage of missiles from Iran. Something I argued some 8 years ago when I was doing the research for my book and so forth, for the Iran book, and I argued back then that if Israel ever attacked Iran is going to launch a barrage of missiles that the Iron Dome will not be able to withstand. And of course, you know, some say what the government's like, well, Mr. O, we don't want you to disclose. Like, no, why? It's the truth. And that is why I'm pushing against this analyst. I'm not saying they're wrong. All I'm saying is they have to be objective and realistic in their assessment. That's all I'm saying. The other aspect is, one, the advantage Israel has is the unspoken deterrent, in a reference to the nuclear triad, because it has this nuclear triad, land-based missiles, submarine, and aircraft. They do have that. Will Israel resort into using nuclear weapon? I don't know. All I know is that if they do, Israel will be done for. That's all I know. So, will Iran be devastated? Of course. Will the whole region be devastated? Of course. Will the whole global security architecture will turn upside down? Absolutely. So, and that is where, again, this provides some sort of an ultimate existential guarantee that prevents Iran or any other regional power from attempting a total destruction of Israel. But in the case of Iran being attacked, Iran already proved they got nothing to lose. They're going for it. That's why we didn't understand when we get into this conflict of not even of our choosing. We didn't think in terms of, can they fight? And they proved because we made the mistake thinking that Iran is Venezuela, Iran is Afghanistan, Iran is Iraq. Yeah. But when you think about why in the long term, Israel, that's my thinking, how I see it. In the long term, Israel cannot fight Iran alone in the long term. So the first one, geography, the distance. Remember that map I showed you right there. The distance. Iran is located over 1,000 kilometers, over 600 miles from Israel. So to launch a sustained airstrike, Israel jets must fly across many hostile and sovereign Arab airspace like Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, they will allow. Don't ever assume that they're going to say no. They'll say no to their people, domestic consumption, but behind the scenes, they will allow Israelis because they did it before. Even inside Iraq recently, the Iraqi government had no idea what was flying over its airspace because we blinded some of the satellite stuff. We, meaning we, the US, in conjunction with Israel. So, and that is why Israel lacks the massive fleet of refueling tanks needed to maintain around-the-clock bombing campaign without foreign staging access. This is where the role of the US comes in. And if this is not enough as far as the geography, you think about the logistic supply chain. Israel cannot fight a short, intense war independently. He can't. On the other hand, a prolonged war of attrition requires a continuous supply of interceptor missiles, precision-guided missiles, munitions, spare parts, and what have you. And this is where the Israeli, without the US, they can't survive. Even Donald Trump said it, even though that's for theatrics, no more, no less. I don't trust what Donald Trump's saying. That's just for show. Because Donald Trump is not in charge. Let me just. Then you think about the no ground invasion capability for Israel. And that's a given. And I'm not even talking about the asymmetric war of attrition. How is that? Iran does not need to invade Israel. It doesn't need to do that. No. Does not need that. Conventionally speaking, it just is going to let the axis of resistance do the work. You have Hezbollah, you have Ansarullah, you have Iraqi militias of different stripes from society. And that in itself will force Israel into a multi-front war of attrition, draining Israeli economy, safety, and paralyzes its domestic workforce. So, and I said it like 4 or 5 months ago that Israel will not be able to sustain 3-front wars. One from Hezbollah, one from Iran, one from Ansarullah. And that is why the ground invasion is out of question. We can't even talk about that because it won't make any sense. Israel will not be able to. And that is exactly my point in all this. And I wanted to address this for you because you're going to be hearing so many statements by the White House now, Donald Trump trying to soften the blow. The Central Command is saying, well, it's not true. When in reality, none of that, it's happening as we speak. And when you think about Iran still have thousands of missiles as we speak. So Israel will stand no chance. So the question is whether Donald Trump is going to follow through with what he said. Oh, Israel, you're on your own. He will be forced to reverse course. That is my thinking. So that is my conclusion for you. And I'm going to play the clips for you as promised. But before I'll do this, the conclusion, I want to talk to you briefly, and I will do a live stream for you, an analysis about something is in the works right now. And this one has to do with Turkey and Iran. And that's all I'm going to say about it right now, because I am waiting till I confirm certain things. And I'll be on the lookout this week. As a matter of fact, if I get any confirmation this afternoon, I will be, you all know my responsibility towards you, towards the whole community. This is why I'm encouraging you. Please subscribe and please share this video with others. A lot of people around the world needs to hear the truth. And I count on you. That's all I have. I don't have sponsors. I don't have, I'm by myself here. And of course, Elizabeth is helping me out behind the scenes technically. She's a genius when it comes down to this stuff. So I'm going to be doing this for you because there is one major development can reshape really, really the trajectory, the geopolitical one that is for West Asia, but it also is going to put Israel in a really, really bad position. And the US will be forced to make a decision. So that's all I have to say about that one. So let me share my conclusion here, and we'll move into some clips that are worth your time. Now, as the dust settles to a degree, there is one truth that is clear. One truth. When Israel, boasts about its unmatched military technology and so forth. But when you take a step back and you put the map of West Asia in front of you, let me put it up right there. You realize that geography and logistics mean it cannot fight a prolonged war with Iran completely alone. And without a constant lifeline from the United States. Without that, what you have the sheer math of a multi-front war of attrition changes everything. So if the US, so here's my question for you. If the US, with now the Iran suddenly, unexpectedly, 3 days after that digital signing of the MOU, shut down the Strait of Hormuz. So here's a question for you. If the US completely stepped back, how long do you think Israel could hold out against the entire axis of resistance alone? So I really would like to read your comments about this one. And what I'm going to do, because here's the thing, the balance of power in West Asia has just completely shifted now. And the math behind this conflict doesn't lie. That is the truth. And that's why, to me, for us, our community, and to those who might be joining us later on, whatever, I would say, let's settle this in the comment section. If the US completely steps back, how long do you think, honestly, think Israel could hold out against Iran? Alone, by the way. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be replying to the best comments over the next 24 hours. Because remember, I spent time researching for it. So I can't spend so many hours just dealing with the comments, all of them. But I do look and I do read because your feedback matters to me. And I want you to know that one. So once again, if the US completely stepped back, how long do you honestly think Israel could hold out against Iran and its proxies entirely alone? And I'm going to put this, I will pin this comment when I finish here, so you'll have it in front of you. All right, let's do some clips now that I promised you. The first one I'm going to do is from a well-established professor. And what I found very interesting about it is I used the term way before. Now, this is not about me first. He's first. No, it's not about that. It's about understanding the alignment of the same thinking. Remember when I used the term surrender deal? I want you to listen to this one here. Take a listen, please. Oh, let me share it first. And by the way, I did reach out to Professor Morandi, and I didn't get a response. Maybe he didn't see the email. So anybody who knows Professor Morandi, I would love to have him here on the channel. We'll have a nice conversation. If you can let him know that I have sent an email, and would love to have him here. So let's take a listen.
Of the sharpest geopolitical minds alive today. And what he's about to lay out is something that Israel spent months telling the world Iran was an unhinged regime that everyone should fear. But when the actual fighting happened, Iran called the US directly to warn them to evacuate their bases first. That's not what a dangerous, irrational country does. Watch. Israel is in its last days. That's not me saying it. That's Professor John Mearsheimer, one of the sharpest geopolitical minds alive today. And what he's about to lay out is something Netanyahu clearly did not see coming. Watch this.
Israel has put the United States in a position where it really has no choice but to cut a deal with the Iranians that is, in effect, a surrender agreement. The last thing the Israelis want to do is pick a fight with us now and make it even more difficult for us to operationalize this agreement. It's just not in their interest. They ought to accept the fact that they helped lead us into a foolish war. It's gone south very quickly. And now the United States and Israel should work together to do everything they can to minimize the damage. That should be their view of this situation. But as you would expect from the Israelis, they're incapable of introspection of this sort. And instead, what they want to do is pick a fight with the Trump administration, which is just going to make, from their point of view, a bad situation worse.
That's Mearsheimer breaking it down in plain terms. His assessment is blunt. This deal between the U.S. and Iran isn't a win, it's an escape hatch from a war that went badly wrong. And the reaction inside Israel's ruling class has reportedly been fury. U.S. intelligence has reportedly circulated assessments warning that Netanyahu is actively working to sabotage any lasting peace with Iran under intense pressure at home to keep fighting. That same tension boiled over publicly at the UN, where Israel's ambassador erupted during a session, shouting over other delegates and demanding silence instead of answering for the allegations on the table. Even Israeli media has turned on Trump. A newspaper owned by the casino billionaire who poured more money into Trump's campaign than almost anyone published an open letter accusing him of betrayal, claiming he'd signed away American interests to a hostile regime. If you think this story deserves more attention than it's getting, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe.
All right, because I have other clips, I just wanted to share that with you first. The second one is about what's going to be happening to Israel moving forward. Okay, let me back this up first. All right, hold on a second. Sorry, guys. All right, let me upload it here and share screen. All right, take a listen, please.
Ally. It may be too early to call it a complete split. Started losing the support of its most important ally. It may be too early to call it a complete split, but recent events suggest something has changed. A proposed U.S.-Iran deal has highlighted disagreements that are becoming harder to ignore. One key issue is Lebanon. While parts of the agreement reportedly support Lebanese sovereignty, Israel has continued operations against what it sees as security threats. Reports indicate senior U.S. officials have become more vocal, urging Israeli leaders to adapt to shifting regional realities. The bigger concern is military support. The United States remains Israel's primary defense partner, providing critical weapons, missile interceptors, and advanced military systems. At the G7, Trump reportedly warned against actions that could fuel instability and undermine diplomatic efforts. Some analysts argue Washington now sees further escalation as a threat to its broader Middle East goals. Meanwhile, critics in Israel say parts of the deal give Iran too many benefits. For now, the alliance remains strong, but the disagreements are becoming impossible to ignore.
All right, and that is exactly when he mentioned about Lebanon part. There were the bodies of 12 IDF soldiers. I'm just showing you a picture of two here. They were flown back to Israel. They were killed, basically, and one of them, to my knowledge, was burned inside the tank. So Hezbollah did put a trap for the Israeli soldiers, and of course, the Israelis going to minimize how many. To my knowledge, there were 12. That's maybe the number could be higher than that. Next one is about, I forget even what it was about. So, but let me upload it first. Okay, let's show this one here. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one about. Okay, hold on a second. Let me start it all over again. Take a listen.
Today, Israel's military is in total shock, and honestly, they should be. A Hezbollah force crossed the border and fired directly at Israeli soldiers, something the IDF swore could never happen. Why the surprise? Because Israel controls a security strip kilometers deep inside Lebanon. The land is flat and open with no trees or walls for hundreds of meters. You can see a rabbit run across it. Yet somehow, Hezbollah fighters slipped through, crossed into occupied territory, opened fire, and caused total panic. The Israeli military's own radio reporter, Doron Kadosh, admits the security apparatus is completely stunned. They thought every inch was clean. They were wrong. And here's where it gets darker. While Israeli soldiers were getting caught off guard, their own national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, was in a cabinet meeting calling for the kidnapping of Lebanese women and children. Yes, you heard that correctly. Women and children to be thrown in Israeli prisons as a way to break Hezbollah spirit. That's not self-defense. That's a straight-up war crime.
That is true. As a matter of fact, Ben-Gvir, the national security advisor in Israel, calling now for burning Israel, burning Lebanon, which is man. How much a person can get to this level of animosity? That's just beyond me. But again, that's karma will come back. Karma will come back. Next clip is about Trump and Israel here. Here is this one here to show you, just to highlight. I still, and again, my opinion, I don't believe this. I just don't believe that is real. I mean, it happened. It's just not real.
There would be no Israel. Without the United States, there would be no Israel. Without me, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what I did. I've had a great relationship with Bibi, but now Bibi has to be more responsible with respect to Lebanon. Lebanon used to be a great country. It was a country where you had professors, doctors, lawyers. The great intellect was in Lebanon. Now it's terrible. I would say of all countries, they've been treated the worst. And they can't defend themselves. And they have Hezbollah, which is a problem for them. So now I'm not happy with the way Israel has handled themselves with Lebanon and with Hezbollah. When you
by the way, Mr. President, Hezbollah is not a problem for them. Hezbollah is a force to reckon with. Its force is far stronger than the government, the military people inside the Lebanese government. So Donald Trump doesn't understand exactly what's going on with that. So next clip is, I think this one was somehow, it's not, the date of it couldn't confirm. This one from Scott Ritter, as you know, you all know Scott, right? But this one, I'm aware of when it happened, when Iran launched the Khorramshahr 4. I just wanted you to hear the take from Scott Ritter's perspective. Take a listen, please.
Mainstream media is about to tell you about what happened at Ben Gurion Airport in the early hours of this morning, because what Iran just did, and I mean just did, is not simply another missile strike in a long list of exchanges. What happened at 2:47 this morning is a strategic inflection point, and by the time I'm done walking you through this, you are going to understand exactly why this single strike may have changed the fundamental calculus of this entire war. 4 Khorramshahr 4 ballistic missiles hit Ben Gurion International Airport before dawn. Not the perimeter fence, not a cargo shed on the edge of the airfield, the main terminal, the primary runway, the fuel storage complex. And as of right now, Israel's only major international airport, the gateway through which 24 million passengers passed last year, is not damaged and limping along. It is not closed pending assessment. It is not functioning at all. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I've spent decades in military intelligence and I've analyzed strikes across multiple theaters of conflict. And what Iran executed this morning is not the work of a desperate adversary throwing missiles at a map and hoping something lands. This was deliberate, methodical, and surgically planned targeting logic designed by people who understand exactly what they need.
Yeah, Scott is right. I mean, the idea of, and I can understand the Scott's background in the military intelligence. I was in one as well, just on a different departments and so forth. But I can understand his assessments, and it makes more sense. So I want you to hear it directly. Next one is about, as I mentioned earlier, the Qatar ignoring the VP, J.D. Vance, which gives you an idea how the Gulf states now starting to see the United States. Take a listen here, please.
Prime Minister completely snubs J.D. Vance. He shakes the hand of Pakistan's Prime Minister and then walks away, completely ignoring J.D. Vance and the U.S. delegation. Why? Most likely because Trump just threatened to murder the Iranian delegation, which caused them to walk out. Subscribe Prime Minister completely cutters.
Yeah, take a listen here and pay attention to the body language, especially J.D. Vance realizing that the Qatari Foreign Minister ignored him completely.
Prime Minister completely snubs J.D. Vance. He shakes the hand of Pakistan's Prime Minister and then walks away, completely ignoring J.D. Vance and the U.S. delegation. Why? Most likely because Trump just threatened to murder the Iranian delegation, which caused them to walk out. Subscribe for...
That is the reason why the delegation walked out in Switzerland, because of that threat. And there were intelligent informations suggesting that might have been, and I quote here, might have been an attempt on Kalibaf and some other members of the delegation, which will be a violation, because that's why Pakistan warned the Israelis against such an act. And that was the last clip I wanted to share with you. As I mentioned,
I know you're pushed for time, and we've only got you till past. So let me cut to the chase. Has Trump really fallen out with Netanyahu, or is it, as some people think, just kabuki theater?
Donald Trump always disliked Netanyahu on some level or distrusted him. It doesn't matter. Every U.S. president has loathed Netanyahu. But there was a period where it did seem as though Donald Trump had, or as though Netanyahu had won Donald Trump's trust. It was February of this year. Netanyahu was coming frequently to Washington. He got a kind of presidential style visit. And anyone who's read the reporting of the final, most decisive visit would know that Netanyahu settled into the head of the table in the White House Situation Room and basically told Donald Trump, along with his Mossad director, how it was going to go down on February 28th when Israel would assassinate Iran's leader and other members of its leadership. And then the decapitation strike would lead to a quick, swift, and easy regime change. And Venezuela's situation would soon ensue, and there'd be a Delcy Rodriguez who'd be willing to do whatever Donald Trump and Israel wanted. And that whole scenario that Netanyahu laid out was discredited. Donald Trump's war, Operation Epstein Fury, is run up against the hard rocks of reality. He's less popular than before the war started. The global economy is in far worse shape than before the war started. His midterm hopes for his Republican Party are far worse than before the war started. And so the reality is forcing the figure, more than any other figure in American history, the one person who has been subjected to more Israeli influence than any other single American in the history of the world, Donald Trump, to actually step back from the Zionist logic, which Netanyahu was able to sort of impose on his administration. They've sent J.D. Vance out to do all of the salesmanship. This is something J.D. Vance had wanted to do. And he's having a great moment right now politically. I don't know if it will last. And we can talk about why I don't think, and I'm sure you share the same view, that the MOU might not hold. But Donald Trump no longer sees the world as Netanyahu wants him to see it. And you're seeing Mark Levin, who was Netanyahu's one of his main proxies, faces and voices in Donald Trump's inner circle, coming to Israel soon on what he says is a family trip. It's actually so Netanyahu can basically brief him and prepare him to undermine Trump or bring Trump back into the fold. Israel Hayom, the pro-Netanyahu propaganda paper in Israel, has published an article savaging Donald Trump and accusing him of failure and disloyalty and a total betrayal, basically speaking on behalf of Miriam Adelson, who is his top donor. And it doesn't have to do with Trump's feelings or his understanding of the world or his analysis. He barely has an analysis. It's about reality. And reality right now just does not align with Zionist logic, which is why these two quote unquote unshakable allies have been pried apart in public in a way we really haven't seen in our lifetimes, or at least since probably the George H.W. Bush era.
And I never thought I would see. I share your analysis completely. It seems to me that whatever happens next, it's no more glad, confident morning for the Israel lobby in the United States. That strategic damage has been inflicted upon them by the things that Trump has said and the things that Vance has said. There's no walking back these things. If you declare that Israel is no more significant an ally than the UK or France, then you really can't walk that back. If you say, as Trump did, that Netanyahu is a con man, and on the principle it takes one to know one, there can be no more severe insult in Donald Trump's lexicon than that. There's no walking that back. What, you're going to give more money to a con man? You're going to drag us into more wars for a con man? It's like spring has sprung. There's a new atmosphere in America. The polls reflect it. Even the mass media, apart from the New York Post, even the New York Times reflects it. I think it's a sea change. I'm glad to see you think the same.
Yeah, I mean, look at what J.D. Vance is saying. It's reality. It's the first time we've heard reality from a figure of this stature, including in the Democratic Party. You know, Tony Blinken would have never said, Israel needs to do what we want, or they will essentially dissolve as a nation because we provide 2/3 of their defensive weapons. They cannot survive without us. Donald Trump, I believe, said that as well. But J.D. Vance is articulating it more clearly. There's no walking that back. And it's partly because J.D. Vance is in a race for his own political survival. There's no clear successor to Trump or to the MAGA movement, which is now basically a collection of astroturfed influencers, cronies, and mafiosi, because of the demoralization that the Trump grassroots has experienced since his failure to release or refusal to release the Epstein files, and then the launch of Operation Epstein Fury, which is crushing Donald Trump's base in the heartland because fertilizer has become so expensive, for example. And everyone's seeing it. The U.S. media refuses to tell the truth. Or, I was watching Fareed Zakaria earlier today, and he interviewed Phil Gordon, who is Biden's main foreign policy handler and also Kamala Harris's foreign policy handler. And they were talking about the MOU and, how this was this great surrender on the part of Donald Trump and that the war was a complete failure. He never mentioned Israel once. But I think everyone else is seeing it, that this was a war launched for Israeli interests in which Zionist logic was imposed on a U.S. administration through various means of influence. Many people wonder if there's bribery, but there certainly was legal blackmail. If there's blackmail, but there certainly was legal bribery. And it was a complete catastrophic failure, I would say. And Robert Kagan, imperial planner Robert Kagan, one of the forebearers of the modern neocon movement, correctly said this is the worst military defeat, possibly in American history. You could say, well, you might say, well, how could it be worse than Vietnam? The economic damage of Vietnam was contained, and the injury morally and physically was mostly felt by the American poor and working class. But in this case, the economic damage is global. It's hammering the stock market. It's affecting everyone. And it was essentially a Zionist war. And so now Israel's going to have to pay some political price. And I think that when we're mostly focused on the Republican Party and Trump right now, but when we see the Democratic primary start to unfold, you're going to see a much more intense arena of contestation around this issue than in the GOP.
Now, we only have time to deal with one other thing, but it's quite an important thing, and you alluded to it. Neither of us, I think, feels that the success of this MOU is in any way guaranteed. And I'm wondering if it's going to survive the week. I pointed out that Trump is now in Camp David. Why is he in Camp David? He never goes to Camp David. He prefers the flesh pots. No, he prefers the flesh pots of Mar-a-Lago for reasons which will be obvious. Why is he in Camp David? Is there potentially something going on, either with relation to Iran or maybe with Cuba?
That's a great question. I don't know. I only know what's happening publicly with J.D. Vance in Geneva, where you have the Pakistani delegation and Ghalibaf and Araghchi, the two main Iranian negotiators. I guess Larijani would have been there if Israel hadn't assassinated him, as they attempted to prevent this moment from coming to bear. And it's all about Lebanon. It's all about Lebanon right now in Geneva. Iran refuses to give up on Lebanon, and the U.S. would love for them to do that and just to hand Lebanon over to Israeli savagery. My colleague Wyatt Reed has been reporting on southern Lebanon. We'll be publishing a piece on what's happening right now in the south, probably by tomorrow. And what he's shown is that hundreds of thousands of Lebanese citizens attempted to go back to their homes in the south, and they were massacred, they were bombarded, they were attacked, and now they're being ethnically cleansed all over again. And this is why Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz. A friend who's down in Bandar Abbas just sent me some photos of the Strait of Hormuz, and it looks like a little bit of a traffic jam there. I just saw it like right before we started talking, I saw those photos. So the MOU may have already collapsed. And you can see also the panic from Israeli cutouts in the U.S., including AIPAC, which attempted to present the neutralization of 4 invading Israeli soldiers as a new kind of Kristallnacht pogrom hate crime against Jews. They were killed attempting to attack a strategic hillside near Nabatea, 45 miles south of, or kilometers south of Beirut, called the Ali al-Tahrir Hill. And Hezbollah just continues to ambush Israeli forces. They can't even get the commander out of the tank. He's been there for days, which raises the possibility that Hezbollah may be able to take those bodies and use them as leverage, as they have done with Ron Arad, for example, back in the 80s. So Israel's suffering serious military setbacks. It can't disentangle itself from Lebanon. Netanyahu politically can't escape the Lebanese quagmire, so he keeps escalating with airstrikes, slaughtering civilians, ethnically cleansing Lebanese. And Iran will not give up on its ally in Hezbollah. It's not going to close the Hezbollah file, and it will not abandon this population who are primarily Shia. I pointed out a few days ago that the Israeli army has been given orders to not allow the Shia population to return home. So it's an ethnic cleansing campaign specifically targeting Shias. Iran's not going to give up on this. And I think that will be sort of the Achilles heel of the MOU. And obviously Israel would like to exploit that vulnerability.
Coffee. Follow me.